If you were like me and thought that McFarlane farts smelled like flowers, or if you genuinely believed that the cure to all illnesses are in a single McFarlane tier, well, it's okay. There's no judgment on my part because I was there. I've been there. I thought McFarlane was like the greatest thing under the sun. I thought they were the best OM, but slowly and surely, I think they're falling behind a little bit, and a lot of it has to do with some of their more recent releases. And by the way, this is coming on the heels of him releasing some of the best action figures that he's done thus far. For example, the Wonder Woman. You have that awesome Sinestro action figure, and just the list goes on and on. Hush. Superman was a phenomenal addition to the DC Multiverse line, and he actually just announced that Kyle Renner Green Lantern 2-pack. I mean, he's doing some phenomenal things, but that's not what this video is about. It's not as positive as I wish it could be. This is definitely going to get very truth heavy. It's going to get somewhat negative. But I really wanted to call out McFarlane for the past few reveals that we've seen. And look, I have no problem with some of the reissues or some of the reuses that he had for some body molds. For example, he had that Batman versus, or I believe it's like DC versus Vampires comic book line, and he reused that Robin body mold, just basically gave him, I believe, new hands and then a new head sculpt. I had no problem with it because it made perfect sense for them to re-release that figure and just add the new hands and then the blood splatter effects or the paint and then a new head sculpt. And I think they've done that for a number of different figures where they just reuse the entire body mold and just give it a slightly different paint job, extra hands, and a head sculpt. If you're going to do that and it still fits in, it's going to add a new character or a new version, alternate version of a particular DC character, I have no problem with it because it's, as I always say, it's adding variety, it's adding value to your display. And I know a lot of people lose their minds over those, but I think it's a good, solid reuse, and it basically forces your hand if you're a big fan of those comic book offshoots or those Elseworld storylines. It's really going to force you to pick these figures up, or you might be able to skip them because they're not necessarily your cup of tea, but for the most part they're store exclusive, so they don't necessarily cut too much into the retail space, even though, let's be brutally honest, retail spaces nowadays are usually empty. We find a lot of empty shelves at like Target and Walmart. I don't think that's really ever been an issue, at least in most populated cities. But McFarlane just decided to release, I think, what he's referring to as Frostbite Batman, which is supposed to be a GameStop exclusive. And I know I've mentioned this before, but usually when he's doing these type of like really weird repaints and they're going to be store exclusives, they're usually very limited. They have a very limited release, and in this particular case I think it was limited to like 7,000 pieces. So in some cases I think they add value to some of these figures. You know, if you pick up one and you decide to keep it in packaging, I think over time, I've said this before, but over time they will gain quite a bit of value just because they were already very limited. They're store exclusive, and then on top of that, I think a lot of people might open them and display them, or a lot of them just might get damaged over time. But if you're a legitimate action figure collector who doesn't really care about gaining value on their figures, these particular releases don't really make a lot of sense. Usually it's just like one monotone boring color or like some sort of effect. Like in this particular case, it's supposed to be kind of somewhat translucent plastic or a paint job. I just don't see any value in these figures. We also saw the Hellbat action figure re-released in yet another color variation. We've seen this one and the Superman Unchained released in just a plethora of different colors, which in most cases end up going on sale or clearance because nobody's really that interested in them. And I know there's a huge percentage of the community that loves making the, well, it's a store exclusive argument, but they are still using resources. They are still using a factory overseas that could potentially be manufacturing a new character, a new action figure that we don't have in our display. But unfortunately, I feel like Hasbro and McFarlane over the years have gotten extremely greedy when it comes down to reuse. It seems like they're just doing the most lazy re-releases, and I think the fan base, the community as a whole, has definitely spoken up and let their frustrations be known. And I know I've mentioned this before, but it's really interesting that a lot of these figures, for example, figures that really didn't sell out or didn't sell too well originally, get re-released. But you have some figures that literally sold out within minutes, and for some unknown reasons those haven't been released just yet. It makes absolutely no sense. You have, for example, the original Deathstroke, you have the original Masked Red Hood, you have some figures from the Dark Knight Metals comic book series. Essentially, a lot of these figures command astronomically high prices in the third-party market, and yet for some unknown reason McFarlane just chooses not to re-release these. And in some cases he really probably wouldn't have to do that much, maybe an alternate color scheme or an unmasked head here or there, or just some, maybe a deluxe re-release with some extra accessories. The possibilities are endless there, but the fact that he incessantly continues to hit us with this barrage of just repaints and lazy paint decos, I think really speak to the mentality of a lot of these OMs. They figure, hey, our consumer base is going to follow us no matter what. Regardless, these figures are going to sell because there are people that are just diehard fans of these manufacturers. And like I said, it's an absolute shame because I think that they have a lot of tools at their disposal. As if the releases weren't bad enough on their own, it's also worth noting that these type of store exclusives usually have like some really intricate or some really nice packaging. For example, the GameStop exclusive Batman is going to have like a translucent plastic sleeve, which as far as I'm concerned, I don't think that they've done that for a normal DC Multiverse release. They're usually saved for those store exclusives, which, as I've already said, is just a huge missed opportunity from McFarlane. There have been some pretty good examples of McFarlane re-releasing figures with minor little tweaks here and there. For example, he did the glow-in-the-dark Swamp Thing, and then he did a glow-in-the-dark Amazon exclusive Green Lantern. Another perfect example of McFarlane giving you a reuse that actually makes sense, especially for these two figures that could potentially be pretty difficult to track down in the third-party market. But honestly, guys, this is just me fuming, spitting saliva for absolutely no reason. It's kind of like the equivalent of throwing a tantrum. But I've complained way too much in today's video. I'm very curious to see what you guys have to say. Do you guys like these store exclusive repaints? I know this is probably like the second or third video that I've made just about this topic, but I feel like it definitely needs to be covered a lot more. It needs to be kind of dived into extensively because it is definitely a hot button issue in the collector community. But let me know your thoughts down below. I'm very curious to see what you guys have to say. Hit the like button, subscribe, stay tuned, stay up to date on all of the content because we definitely upload quite a bit on a weekly basis. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Stay safe out there. Continue collecting. Don't feel peer pressured into buying anything that you don't absolutely love. And I will see you guys in the next video. Thank you.